Hey, Elisa, happy celebration of the arts, hence the flowered shirt. It's the official mark of the beginning of summer. At least that's how I've always looked at it in my 20 years of teaching in Ridgewood High School. So this was always the best day of the year. So get out there and make some art and celebrate all that stuff today. I don't know. All right. Quick joke. Hey, what do you do with a sick boat? Well, you just take it to the dock. There you go. All right. So for today, finishing up the 1970s. So we're doing that. There's no additional homework because your project is due next class, which I believe is on Wednesday, right? With who, the greatest American artist. So you should be finishing that, probably starting that, but you've had time, so whatever. Yeah, so also included are some like short little video clips. With the 1970s, there's a little video on the Iranian hostage crisis. This is what the movie Argo is about. So if you've seen the movie Argo, maybe this will make a little bit more sense for you. But yeah, also I've assigned the next kind of project, which we've talked a little bit about in the Zoom, the idea of this kind of a digital learning portfolio in which you guys are going to kind of like just reflect on this experience for the last 9 weeks. So it's a project that's broken up into several pieces. I've made little videos about each piece. I think it's self-explanatory. Don't know. Let me know if you have any questions or confused on anything. Yeah, but enjoy the long weekend. It's Memorial Day on Monday. I ask that you kind of remember why you have the day off, what Memorial Day is all about, right? So Memorial Day is in honoring all those that have fallen, all those that have given, that last full measure of devotion, as Lincoln says in the Gettysburg Address. So reflect on that. That, yeah, we're sacrificing right now by staying inside, but think of those who sacrificed even more so we can enjoy all these great freedoms that we do enjoy. So stay well, stay safe, stay smart, and see you guys later. So today we'll finish the 1970s. So we last left off with the resignation of Richard Nixon, the only president ever to resign. Gerald Ford becomes president, and he is known as the accidental president. And Gerald Ford is going to finish the rest of Nixon's term. During that, we've already talked about how he pardons Richard Nixon, which is highly controversial and very unpopular. You're dealing with an 11% unemployment rate, and you have the energy crisis, which is continuing on. All of these things are not going to make Gerald Ford likely for re-election in his own right. And with the election of 1976, he loses to Jimmy Carter. And Jimmy Carter runs as an outsider. Jimmy Carter was a governor. He was governor of Georgia, and he used this to his advantage. People after Watergate believed that all politicians were corrupt, that you couldn't trust Washington, D.C. And so normally your presidential candidates came from Washington. They were senators, they were congresspeople, vice presidents. Instead, Jimmy Carter is going to begin this trend of looking outside of Washington, D.C. And it's a trend that kind of still continues, right? If you look at Jimmy Carter, he is a governor. After Jimmy Carter, we Ronald Reagan. He was a governor. You then had George H.W. Bush, who was Ronald Reagan's vice president. And then after George H.W. Bush, you have Bill Clinton. He was a governor. After Bill Clinton, you then get George W. Bush, who was a governor, and so on and so forth. So this kind of becomes the pattern. But Jimmy Carter, as a political outsider, not knowing how Washington works, is going to put him at a distinct disadvantage, being that he's not going to be able to get his legislative agenda through since he doesn't really know how the mechanism works. If you remember, we talked about Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson knew the intricacies in and out. He knew the players in and out. He knew how to wheel and deal. Jimmy Carter brings none of that to the job, and as a result, he's going to be very unsuccessful in getting things passed that he wants. The one bright spot, though, of Jimmy Carter's presidency are the Camp David Accords, which is a peace agreement between Egypt and Israel, which is signed at Camp David, which is the presidential retreat located in Maryland. And these are two countries that did not like each other. These are two countries that had a long history of antagonism with each other. And Carter invites them both to the United States negotiates with them. The mere fact that the Egyptian president Anwar Sadat is sitting down with the Israeli president Menachem Begin is huge, in which the Arab world refused to acknowledge that Israel even had a right to exist. So that was a huge coup to get that, and then to have them strike an actual peace deal that has some rough patches, especially in 1981 when Sadat is assassinated, basically for participating in this. But for the most part, the peace has kind of held. Um, Tenuous, but it's still kind of there. And again, that is the big achievement of Carter's presidency. But there's a lot of negatives. In particular, the worst is probably the Iran hostage crisis. And I've included a short video which kind of explains this in a little bit more detail for you. Um, and so the situation here is in Iran, the Iranian ruler, Shah, the Shah Reza Pahlavi, or just the Shah, was seen as an American puppet. The Americans had put his family in power in the 1950s, and the Shah was a brutal dictator to his own people. He was popular with us. He was friendly with us, basically because of oil. Um, but the United States became connected with the Shah's um, brutal tactics in Iran, and we were seen as the country propping him up. So there's a lot of anti-American sentiment to begin with because of this. The Shah begins feeling the heat. There's a religious revolution happening within the country. He flees the country, and then while he has fled the country, while he's in Egypt, he realizes that he has cancer. He asks to come to the United States for cancer treatment. Jimmy Carter originally says no, that thinks this would be a horrible idea, but he's kind of talked into it. And once the Shah is invited into the United States for medical treatment, now we have the Shah. The people in Iran want the Shah. They want to bring him back to put him on trial. And of course, we say no. So the Iranians take it out on us and they storm the American embassy and they take initially 63 Americans hostage. And those Americans will remain held hostage for 444 days. Uh, and so, in every night on television, this plays out. There's on Channel 7 on ABC, they had a show called Nightline, which aired at 11:30 after the local news, and it began every episode by saying the Iranian hostage crisis, day 121, and every night they talked about this. So it was a constant reminder of how weak we were against what Americans were seeing as a small power. How can the mighty United States be powerless to go in and get our American hostages out? Carter tries to fight back by freezing Iranian accounts, by basically seizing their money. That only infuriates them and angers them even more. Carter eventually orders a rescue mission in which he sends in members of the Delta Force. They fly into the deserts of northern Iran. There, they're going to rendezvous with a bunch of helicopters that are going to take them into Iran. There's a bad weather, some mechanical failures, a horrible accident in which a helicopter crashes. Helicopter blade hits a tanker filled with fuel, and 8 Americans are killed. So, even more embarrassing for Jimmy Carter is you have a bungled hostage rescue. And while all this is going on, this is weakening his position elsewhere in the world. The Soviets see this and they push. So Carter wanted to stress human rights and the value of every person, but he had no power to kind of do it. The Soviets see weakness, so they invade Afghanistan in 1980. And again, we're powerless to do anything about it. And we just kind of let it happen. Again, another embarrassment for the country. To get back at the Soviets, the Summer Olympics were going to be held there in 1980. So we don't go, wow, that'll show the Soviets. All that does is anger American athletes who have been training for 4 years and now they don't get to participate. In retaliation for that, the Soviets will boycott the 1984 Summer Olympics, which are held in Los Angeles. What you do, though, have is in February of 1980, you have the Winter Olympics. And the Soviets do go to that, and that is held in Lake Placid, New York. And you do have that hockey game between, those American college kids and these Russian, basically professional hockey players. And it is the one moment of pride that the country has. And if you watch the movie Miracle, it does a really good job showing that. And in particular, the head coach, who seemed like this very aggressive, no nonsense, tough guy, in Herb Brooks, people looked at Herb Brooks and said, "Hey, why can't the American president be more like this guy? He doesn't take anything. He's fighting, cursing, basically, getting in there, mixing it up with the Soviets. I wish we had a president like that." And so, with the backdrop of a hostage crisis, a continued energy crisis, um, you have the embarrassments of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Carter has to run for re-election, and he runs against Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan was governor of California, and Ronald Reagan basically sums up his entire campaign in one question. And he basically asked the American people, "Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago?" He says, "If you feel you are better off today, then you should vote for Jimmy Carter. If you don't think you're better off, then maybe you need to change and maybe you should vote for me." And again, with all those horrible things going on, it's a question that resonates with the American people. Jimmy Carter actually tries to give a pep talk to the American public and gives a speech in which he talks about how the country has a crisis of confidence. It's actually called the malaise speech. He never uses the word malaise, but it's such a bummer of a speech. It does the exact opposite. It just reconfirms in people's mind that the country is not going in the right direction. And for the first time, when they actually interview young people, and they ask young people, "What do you think your future will be like?" Um, for the first time, people are pessimistic. Most young people believe that their lives are going to be better than their parents' lives. But for the first time, when people are asked at the end of the 1970s, they think that their future is a little bit bleaker than what their parents had, which is telling. And Reagan uses this to his advantage and, in a landslide, wins the election of 1980.